We are used to thinking that immortality is a myth, a fairy tale, or a fantasy of the ancients, but what if one person actually conquered death itself? One of our listeners sent in a story about a man who has lived among us for centuries and inevitably resurrects after death. Not through magic or a miracle, but something else entirely. In this science fiction podcast, we'll explore how he cheated death, what price must be paid for eternal life, and what happens to a person when they have time on their hands.
Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today we are striving in for something truly unique. We're diving deep into a custom-tailored science fiction story that was actually submitted by one of our listeners. It's a meticulously crafted world with its own set of deeply strange, fascinating, and ultimately terrifying rules.
This is a really rich piece of source material. We're looking at a narrative that's very contained, centered on this single isolated town. It's set roughly around the 15th or 16th century.
Okay.
And the core premise is immediately arresting. Everyone, and I mean everyone in this community, possess some kind of unusual inborn ability.
So it's not learned, it's just there.
It's just there. It's as if the very geology or, the environment of that location just amplified biological instability into these personal superpowers.
Yeah. Right, so our mission today is pretty clear then. We need to unpack the unexplained phenomena of this reality and really track the high-stakes journey of one protagonist. His desperate desire to belong basically pushed him to get an ability, but that decision brought about an unexpected and total catastrophe for his entire home.
We're essentially analyzing a contained biological and sociological thought experiment. And the central paradox of this strange city is that while everyone had some bizarre, unique attribute, there was one boy, about 15 years old.
And he was just normal.
Utterly, completely normal. He had no ability whatsoever, and that lack of power, this normalcy, made him the ultimate outcast. The white crow in a town where being extraordinary was just the baseline.
That sets up the perfect tragedy. So let's start with the rules of the road. What did daily life even look like in a town like that, where these abilities were universal but also totally random?
Oh, that's the thing. The source doesn't give a neat answer for the purpose of the powers, which to me suggests they were purely a localized, spontaneous phenomenon.
So no grand design.
No. Imagine a world where utility is completely random. Sure, basic levitation might be common enough, but then you encounter abilities that just stretch belief. The source gives some pretty specific examples that hint at some serious biological reconfiguration.
Get us the highlights, because this doesn't sound like Marvel. This sounds much, much weirder.
Exactly. It's weirder. For instance, one man had a sense of smell that could track minute chemical changes over kilometers, far beyond any animal.
Wow.
Then there was a woman who could spontaneously grow and shed a full, thick coat of fur. Maybe she was a walking textile mill. Who knows?
And it gets more extreme than that, right?
Yeah. You have a woman who could transform her legs into a long, functional snake's tail and back again at will.
A snake's tail for locomotion.
For locomotion, yeah. And maybe the most whimsical but telling example, a 12-year-old boy whose only power was the compulsion to walk everywhere, exclusively on his hands.
And that was his entire power, just walking on his hands.
That was it. So you have this town where everyday life must have relied on adapting to these biological quirks. Did the guy with the super smell become the chief hunter? Did the fur-shedding woman become the local textile supplier?
You'd have to assume so.
Right, but the source suggests they found ways to integrate these powers, but the powers themselves remained, individual and kind of isolating. What really stands out to me is that this instability wasn't limited to humans.
Ah, so the animals had powers too.
They did, which points back to the location itself being the source of all this.
That makes sense. It's some kind of energy field or something in the water.
Could be. The source describes a domestic cat that would randomly swap features with a rabbit.
You're kidding?
Not at all. Its ears and tail would just cycle back and forth. No predictability. Or, get this, a dog whose entire lower jaw could invert.
Insert. How does that even work?
It transformed it into this monstrous, unrecognizable thing. Its upper jaw running along its back and the lower one along its stomach. This isn't helpful utility. It's just pure, violent biological mutation.
It sounds like the town existed in a state of just constant bizarre change. My favorite detail, though, has to be the small bird.
The one with the monkey leg head.
Yes.
Yeah.
That could repeat both human and animal speech. it just adds this touch of dark humor to the whole setting.
It creates a world where the utterly mundane being regular is the truly radical concept, which brings us right back to our protagonist. The 15-year-old misfit, totally devoid of this environmental influence and feeling deeply, deeply incomplete because of it.
And his mother, she couldn't accept his normalcy. She was convinced his power wasn't missing. It was just blocked.
Powerful motivation. So this young man, driven by the purest human desire to simply belong, starts a quest. It leads him out of his town, following these cryptic instructions toward an ancient figure and an artifact.
And here's the question for you, the listener. What price did he pay for belonging? Was getting a power worth losing everything he held dear? We'll follow his trail right after this. Okay, we're back. So the source material is very specific about his journey. He traveled for weeks, and his only guide was a specific star in the night sky.
Right, and on his path, he passed through these groves of strange trees that emitted a very distinct, almost ritualistic smell.
And that scent is the clue.
The scent is the clue. The narrative makes it clear these trees were crucial. They led him high into the mountains where he finds a small, isolated hut. Inside, there's an old man, referred to only as grandfather.
And he's expecting him.
He is. Critically, he already knows exactly why the boy's there. This wasn't some random encounter. It felt like predestination.
And the fix wasn't an incantation or some grand trial. It was chemical. It came directly from those trees.
Yes, that's right. The grandfather gave him a resin, a viscous substance called smala. It was a deliberate mix of 3 colors, yellow, red, and black, all derived from those trees. The boy consumes it, and his long-blocked potential is, well, unlocked.
And his ability is resurrection, conditional immortality.
Yes, but this is where the condition becomes the entire mechanism of the story. The source material stresses that the resurrection was not instantaneous. This mandatory gap between the moment of death and the moment of revival is the heart of his conflict.
So if the resin gave him what he wanted, an ability, why did the source frame it as the beginning of a disaster?
Because the test came instantly. Trouble found him. On his journey back home, he was ambushed by a large bear-like animal. The attack was quick, brutal. He was, and the source is clear, torn into pieces. His remains scattered.
So describe the mechanics of this first death. This is the first time the power activates. What actually happens when this immortal dies?
What's fascinating is how it deviates from a normal death. Normally, a person's ethereal body, their consciousness, basically would just detach. In his case, it didn't, not completely. His fully aware consciousness remained tethered to his destroyed physical remains.
Tethered how?
By a connection located somewhere near the solar plexus or navel area.
So he's trapped, he's conscious, pain-free, but he's just hovering over his own mangled body. That's a bizarre kind of limbo.
Precisely. He felt 0 physical pain from the attack, but he experienced this immense emotional discomfort and distaste just watching the remnants of his body. And in this state, he received this influx of innate knowledge. He couldn't move on. He had to wait for the next stage.
This sounds far more gruesome than revival. How long did this conscious observation last?
The forced renewal process began immediately, driven by natural biology. The source is very specific here. Decomposition set in. He felt, distantly, the sensation of worms and maggots consuming his remains, including the contents of his head.
What, he was aware of that?
Aware of the entire process. This macabre state of decay lasted for approximately 2 weeks.
2 weeks of forced conscious observation while your physical form breaks down until only the skeleton is left.
Yeah.
It forces you to reevaluate what life even means. What signals the end of that horrific waiting period?
Once the physical remains were completely reduced to bone, the restoration program activated. It's described as an immediate, involuntary reversal. The body just started growing back muscles, nerves, skin regenerating entirely from the remaining skeletal structure.
So even if bones were missing,
the entire framework would just regrow from the largest remaining piece, a complete biological rebuild from scratch.
was the speed always the same?
The first restoration was the slowest. It took 5 days to go from skeleton to a fully whole, healthy person. After that, though, subsequent resurrections were streamlined. They only took 2 days. He'd just stand up, fully functional, and resume his life.
He finally got the ability he craved, but it's tied to this mandatory 2-week decomposition. But let's turn to the wider consequence. This terrifying power had a profound destructive impact on the community he so desperately wanted to join.
This is the tragic pivot. When he returned home, resurrected and whole, the town instantly turned on him.
But they didn't try to kill him to test the power.
No, because they feared the consequence more than they feared him. They feared a curse.
What curse?
An ancient legend foretold that if someone acquired this specific type of resurrection, one tied to the physical breakdown and rebuilding of the body, it would leach the energy from the location itself. It would cause the entire town to perish.
And the legend came true.
It did. After his ability manifested, all the other residents of the town, their supernatural functions just ceased, the levitation stopped, the snake woman's legs stayed legs, the animal transformations ended, and subsequently all the people who relied on that instability to live began to die. Naturally, but rapidly. He was the only survivor.
His quest for belonging resulted in the complete destruction of his entire world. That's the definition of a catastrophic irony. Okay, let's move to the present. He's now lived for, close to 500 years? An immortal in the modern age, but he always looks about 30. What have centuries of loneliness and constant learning done to him?
His intellectual growth is exponential. He's a living archive, constantly working different trades, always healthy, intensely curious. He pursues knowledge aggressively, new languages, sciences, technologies, and he's died hundreds of times, often putting himself in deliberately dangerous situations, almost compulsively.
Is that because he's reckless, or because he knows the 2-week wait is the only real constant in his life?
The source material suggests it's a mix of both. He carries the weight of 500 years, so maybe the constant cycle of decomposition leads to a strange form of recklessness. He knows the worst outcome is just 2 weeks of discomfort, but in the modern world, that 2-week wait creates immense logistical problems.
Right. If he's killed in a public accident, he can't just decompose on the side of the road, or in a locked morgue drawer. How does he manage the operational reality of being a 2-week delayed immortal?
This raises a critical set of logistics. He requires absolute privacy for the decomposition and restoration. Being buried or cremated would be disastrous, he'd be trapped. So he relies entirely on a trusted companion, a close friend or a sister figure, a role that changes over the centuries as they, inevitably age and die.
What kind of instructions does he leave for this companion? That must be a massive burden on their life.
He has a very specific, legally binding contract, a will, basically. It dictates the conditions for his burial, always quick, shallow, and it has to include necessary modern items in the coffin.
Like what?
Maybe a radio, a notebook, and pen. Things to maintain sanity during the few days of restoration after the 2-week wait is over. And crucially, the document authorizes the companion to hire people to exhume him, precisely at the 2-week mark.
To exhume a pile of skeletal remains in the middle of the night. That is bizarre and horrific duty to place on a loved one. And this brings us to the emotional cost. He's mastered trades and knowledge, but what about love?
He just stopped. He stopped forming traditional long-term attachments. He explicitly stopped getting married or having kids centuries ago, watching his wives and children age and die while he remained eternally young, stuck at 30. It just caused him immense recurring pain. His centuries of experience have given him vast knowledge, but also a profound enforced solitude.
It's one thing to survive a plague, but it's another to willingly choose solitude because love costs too much. What specific realization made him understand that companionship was just incompatible with his condition?
It wasn't one thing, it was the accumulation of loss. Every single relationship ended the same way, forcing him to reinvent his entire social circle every few decades. The ultimate lesson he learned was that his longevity required him to become a temporary figure in everyone else's life, never a permanent one. He's the only constant.
So we have this living archive, a man who carries the weight of a lost city and centuries of knowledge, but he's bound to this gruesome cycle of decay and revival. What are his options now?
And that's his ultimate philosophical dilemma. He's considered using his vast knowledge to try and delete the resurrection mechanism. But his data suggests this wouldn't just stop the 2-week cycle, it would revert him to a normal, short human lifespan. He'd die of old age or an accident shortly after.
So it's a choice between gruesome longevity and a brief, normal existence.
Exactly.
And what about abandoning the physical world? He spends 2 weeks as an ethereal consciousness. Could he just stay that way?
He's considered that too. But the tether, that connection to the physical plane, is what gives him functionality in this world. Abandoning the body would mean living purely in his ethereal form, but with significantly reduced functionality. He couldn't really interact with the world he finds so fascinating.
So he continues to seek out new knowledge, new sciences, trying to find a third way. To maintain the longevity without the death and decay cycle, he's trying to innovate his way out of his own life condition.
He's a man who destroyed his world just to belong, and then spent 500 years learning everything he could while struggling to escape the very power that keeps him alive.
And despite his centuries of learning, his vast knowledge base, the greatest restriction on his existence is the one thing he's been told he will never know.
When it will end.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When or if this forced cycle of death and revival will finally end. The power itself might just be permanent, inescapable.
Which leaves us with the big question.
So we ask you, the listener, is the burden of conditional immortality, especially one tied to a mandatory 2-week decomposition, worth the promise of endless experience? It forces this strange relationship with time where the body is temporary but consciousness is bound forever. It asks us whether the pursuit of belonging could ever justify destroying an entire world. That's something to mull over until our next deep dive.